Welcome to all of you to the 115th AAG annual meeting. The weather is fair, and the cherry blossoms are at their peak. Though we gather here in the shadow of our nation's capital and its current occupants, I can tell you, as a longtime resident of Washington, that there is also much to be discovered and appreciated in Washington, D.C., and I urge you to seek out that creative and resilient that characterizes Washington, D.C. and its environs. Our annual meeting this year also addresses core themes for this time and place. This year's three major themes are, number one, geography and human rights. Secondly, environmental science and geography. Thirdly, geography and health research. AAG President Sheryl Luzzadder-Beach has organized a terrific presidential panel of very distinguished scholars on the interactions of all three of these themes, which I think is a great way to approach this. I'd like to just point out a few highlights of the meeting for you. Eric Holder, the first African American ever to hold the office of Attorney General of the U.S., will be joining us tomorrow. And on Friday, we'll also have the pleasure of welcoming Carla Hayden, the Librarian of the Congress. She's a fantastically talented woman and also achieved some notoriety for personally keeping the libraries of Baltimore open during the Freddie Gray riots, so there would be safe spaces for people to go to. Speaking of safe spaces, I would like to let you know that the AG has developed a very comprehensive policy which we're implementing during this meeting around anti-harassment and harassment-free spaces at the AG. You'll see a lot about that and hear about it, I think, from Sheryl and also from Lorraine Dowler, who has spearheaded this program with the help of lots of people. So please, we're very pleased to have this new program in place, and please do acknowledge it and abide by it. Before I introduce Sheryl, though, I would like to note that this meeting also holds a bittersweet moment for me. This is my last annual meeting in which I'll be welcoming you as Executive Director. After nearly 20 years of working for the AG and giving it everything that I had to give, I will be retiring on February 1st, 2020, prior to our Denver meeting next year. I want to assure you, though, that the AG is in very good shape. We have a very strong financial foundation to pass on to the next generations. We have become a very inclusive organization, inclusive in many ways, inclusive of all people, inclusive of subfields of geography. And I think that's one of our strengths, and that's a strong area in which I hope and I will urge you all to continue on with in the years ahead. We also have a very strong staff at the AG. They're very committed. They're an excellent group of people. And when you see them around the AG booth or the careers area, say thanks, because they do so much work and they're so crucial to the success of this organization that they deserve all of the accolades that you would give them. We've strengthened our publications. We've broadened our scope. We now have the first new AG publication in many years, the Geohumanities Journal. Something that I took a great deal of pride in developing over about 10 years. We've also had very strong initiatives around geography and health, and we now have, I think, positioned geography and geographers to be key players in the health research at NIH. at CDC and really at WHO. We have a special greeting from the head of the World Health Organization to kick off some of our themes around geography and health. And so please take those in if you get a chance. So with that, I just want to say that it's been an enormous pleasure to work with all of you. I have so many friends now around the world that I cherish, and I really have enjoyed working with all of the presidents of the AG over these past 20 years, and it's been, for me, just a privilege. And so I want to thank all of you for that opportunity over these past 20 years. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sheryl Luzzadder-Beach, who is, I got to tell you, she's done a fabulous job as president. I've always known her, I've known her for many years, but I've never seen her in an executive role, and she is just terrific. She's fair, she's conscientious, she can be very strong when she needs to be. She's moved things forward in this organization a great deal, and it's a pleasure to have worked with her. I think most of you know Sheryl, but I'll give you just a few highlights. She's currently professor of the Department of Geography in the Department of Geography and Environment at the University of Texas, Austin, where she had been the first woman chair ever at that institution. She has, prior to that, she'd worked at, she was professor of geography and associate provost at George Mason University, where she was also a faculty member for over 20 years prior to arriving at UT Austin. Dr. Luzzadder-Beach was awarded, along with Tim Beach, the 2010 AG Gilbert Outstanding Research Award in Geomorphology, and in 2013 she was recognized with the George Mason University College of Sciences Outstanding Publication Award. I could go on, and she's got a lot of awards, but she's also a wonderful person, and it's my great pleasure to introduce her to you, and she will introduce these fabulous speakers. Sheryl, thank you.
Well, first of all, we have some seats down in the front. If you're still standing in the back, there's plenty of room, so don't be shy about moving forward. Well, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the opening of the 2019 American Association of Geographers. This will be our opening session and presidential plenary, and at the end we will have the great pleasure of presenting the Honorary Geographer Award. I want to also welcome you to my former home, having spent 20 years here prior to living in Texas, working for George Mason University. It's really nice to be back in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area and to see the cherry blossoms and to see so many people assembled here with high hopes for geography. I want to thank the AAG staff. I want to thank Doug Richardson. I want to thank all of you, committee members, council, who brought us to this point today. We work year-round on our scholarship and on our teaching. We work year-round on policies and procedures, and the AAG meeting is the tip of the iceberg of all of that work, but it's also the frosting on the cake because we get to see each other and to celebrate what we do. I'm very happy to have brought together the three themes of our meeting into this presidential plenary, and we will have distinguished speakers addressing those three themes and how one or more of those themes intersect with their work. Our distinguished panelists include scholars in human and physical geography, in environmental history, and in biological sciences. So our guest panelists, and I will do longer introductions as each speaks in turn. Our guest panelists include Dr. Mei-Po Kwan of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Dr. Heather Viles of Oxford University, Geography Department, Dr. John McNeill, University Professor of History at Georgetown here in Washington, D.C., and the American Historical Association President. And finally, joining this special panel will be Dr. Rita Colwell, University of Maryland College Park Distinguished University Professor, who will receive the AAG's 2019 Honorary Geographer Award and speak at this event. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Mei-Po Kwan, who is Professor of Geography and Geographic Information Science at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Mei-Po has many, many accomplishments. She's won many awards, Creativity in Geography, E. Willard and Ruby S. Miller Award, Alan Hay Research and Transport Geography, Royal Geographical Society Awards. She has done distinguished work in GIS and in public health and medical geography, and it gives me great pleasure to invite Mei-Po Kwan to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheryl, for the wonderful introduction. And it is indeed an honor to speak to you and then share some of my thoughts about this important topic. And I will focus mainly on intersection of geography and human health. Does it work? Oops, sorry, yeah. So I think that I'll just have time to make a few points and highlight some of some small contributions that I have made. First of all, I want to look into geospatial technology and how does it affect, environmental health research and society. And then I want to think about the understanding of the links between human health and the environment. And finally, I want to point to perspectives of multidisciplinary and international. So before, is the clicking? Oh, okay, yeah. So, well, first of all, I would like to highlight some of my small contributions in the field, and has long been focused on the individual and focusing on the individual in geographic context. Both methodological and theoretical work has contributed to some of the new paradigms, more mobility and the dynamic context with a person-specific perspective. And finally, looking into the recent advances in geospatial technology and how does it affect, and advance our understanding. Okay, well, I think that, with a global positioning system and some of the sensors and technology, we have been able to look into very fine spatial and temporal resolution in human movement and exposure, and then look into, different kind of data collection. For example, this is, in Lexington, Kentucky, and we are able to track people with a very fine scale in every 10 seconds, and then the third dimension is time. So 7 days, and then we have a data point for every 10 seconds. Along with that, then we can look into link to the environmental factors, for example. Yeah. Oh, okay, this clicker. Yeah, so, and then we publish it with Doug Richardson and others in another NIH people and my good child in science, and pointing to a spatial turn in health research. And what it is that we're able to personal, monitoring and tracking people in, very fine space-time level, and linked it to also the biomarker and the environmental personal sensing. So then what is the environment that we are looking into? I think geographers are very good into looking into the physical environment. For example, physical geographies, remote sensing, and looking into so-called the natural environment, like looking into greens and blues and those environment and how does it affect human health. And we are also good into looking into the built environment, especially in GIS science, that we have measures on, for example, walkability and also pedestrianized built environment. And then, of course, a big initiative, everywhere is like promoting active, travel that is using bicycle. So that is all, very much promoted in the social environment. And then how we find we can do this, for example, we have database and we collect database to the precision of lat long on, for example, the number of structures with broken windows and vandalism, trash in the street, and et cetera, et cetera. So in a city, we probably collect like 100 variables on the physical or so-called the built environment. But what my point here today, I want to say that the environment, it looks like that we're collecting them and assuming a particular direction and influence on human. But except that, in my research projects, I found actually the opposite, for vulnerable population. They don't react to the environment in a certain way and consistently. So this is one of the first points that I want to make. For example, in my research project in Tijuana, when we go to visit, interact with the participant of heavy drug users and female sex worker, we actually have to look for, especially the drug user, we have to look for trash. So trash seems like a negative environmental influence on health, but they are because of the police harassment, the fear about those violence, and then actually consistently those environmental factors happen in a very different direction. And then the social environment is also the same. Policing seems to be when I see a police, I'm very happy, but probably not, like the female sex worker in Tijuana project. Now, just to highlight a little bit of that. And intoxicated people, evidence of prostitution, I think those are also can work very differently. Then what are we having to contribute in geography? To the environmental influence. For example, we can link or model or using GIS to link to build 3D models, a very sophisticated model for land use, for air pollution, for the environment. But it doesn't mean that we can link those to human behavior and eventually the health outcome. So then some of my contributions to the field, I think that it can be important, would be first, again, I don't have time to explain, but just to mention that it's the uncertain geographic context problem, which actually talking about what is the most relevant space and time that is for the individuals on the environmental influence. And then you can say, the home, like when we get, the home address, then we can have a buffer or what is surrounding neighborhood. And that is what we have been conventionally done. But what I'm proposing that may not be the most relevant context. And then, of course, the agrammatic geography is talking about, like when it's the big data, then we use algorithm to mediate knowledge, and the knowledge production in those can be very uncertain. And then the idiosyncratic nature of the neighborhood effect is what I am going to just highlight in a few projects. For example, like in the drug abuser and then also the female sex worker project. And then finally, the neighborhood averaging problem is also some of the newest contribution. So what I'm proposing is that instead of just looking into the home base, but we are following the spatial temporal configuration of exposure, looking into more individualized measures. And then again, like as I have followed my first point, where we have always a very important assumption or conventional notion of environmental effect is following like the people respond environmental influence consistently to particular influence in one direction. However, that is people's response to environmental influence can be highly, personal and idiosyncratic. And then so they may not, respond at the same way. And why, the geospatial technology can help us, to uncover a lot of the very detailed and then underlying reasons, to a certain extent. And that is important because this is also important for us to look into environmental justice. And they provide some of the means, like for example, to look through high-resolution space-time data and looking into a different frame. For example, this is my PhD student Jun Wang's work with me and on, looking into a multidimensional environmental cube. So first of all, we refine, the space and time framework and put it into a 3D point count, and then each point can represent multidimensional environmental factors. And the people traveling between it can be a trajectory going through time and going further. And what follow, I will just, I don't have time, but I will just highlight some of the importance of the 3 projects that I have been working on women's in sex work and the risk environment of 2 Mexico-US border cities and the substance users in Baltimore, Maryland, and then also a comparative project. Again, just a few words. First of all, I think that, in order to uncover, female sex worker under history and the oral history by storytelling and narrative, and then we can combine geospatial technology to look into the experience of certain individuals of social groups like female sex worker. Their stories probably is untold. The GPS tracking can only follow where they go, but it doesn't, uncover where they don't go. And then that is the fear, the geographies of fear. And then that is maybe very important for their health outcome. So the low-income people are the same. So geonarrative integrates space and time, build qualitative data analysis, and it's a GIS-based approach to narrative analysis. And it can be combined with mixed method, and again, the citation is down there with my collaborators. I have to be a little bit quick, and then, looking into space-time path, building multimedia dynamical link to multimedia like photos and narratives. And also, combine, perform qualitative data analysis. Okay, and going through narratives and looking into the space-time and map them. Oh. And then looking into the trajectory. Again, the 3 dimension is as time, and going through the color code is the fear, the level of fear. And, blue is the least, and then green, and then the red. And so in this way, we are looking into a geography of fears of, where people are afraid to go. And this is proven to be very important in a structural violence and vulnerability in the female sex worker work. Because when I was going through street by street in the red light district talking to these people, and then they're actually very afraid of police violence. And that's why they don't go to the pharmacies and other places to get clean needles and thus, avoid infection of HIV. And this is actually, again, a very important reason. And so the risky environment can be managed, and the harm reduction can be done in another way, and looking into police harassment exploitation. So this is one project. So, and then we conclude that, there can be other means, to help them to get, health resources. So, and then I want to highlight another project on Baltimore, and then this is substance users to psychological stress. So again, I have to be more quick in highlighting, and then this published work. So we have 700,000, GPS points on each individuals, and then we are looking into, since it's GPS, and then we got like every 5 seconds, we got a data point, then we are looking into how they're getting into the stressful, situation and the environment that they are getting craving for the drugs and eventually taking the drugs. And we found out that the momentary exposure, the moment that they're taking the drugs is not the most important, but actually a few hours ago when they're exposed to the stressful environment. So this is 1 hour, then people with drug, test no positive test. That means that they take the treatment and they quit the drugs, and then the hour, and then we actually use a geovisualization to looking into, this is a quadratic kernel estimation, and then where they actually have been in the area, and how does it relate, for example, to crime in the area. Again, all this visualization have to be quick. So, but eventually the summarization is that for the non-drug taker, 5 hours consistently, they have been in actually a more high crime area. But for the drug users, and then they relapse, and then from 3 to 5 hours, the patterns are very similar. And then that means that when they're exposed to actually less crime, they get into a more stressful situation. And this is exactly the opposite reaction to the environment than we normally would assume. So this is a second point that I want to confirm. And then lastly, actually not lastly, but talking about international perspective, then we got a project on U.S.-China, working with Peking University, Sun and East China Normal University, compared to, a Chicago project, carrying sensing bags with noise and air pollution and GPS tracking, and then, in a small bag, then people personally tracking their environment. And then again, there's tons of papers published and, no time to, really going through the details. But I want to highlight through international perspective. We find out that in Chicago, in the Humboldt Park, highly segregated, majority Hispanic population, the indoor pollution, air pollution, is more important and more serious than the outdoor. And in Peking, in Beijing, the outdoor is more important. And the environmental injustice expressed it in a very different way. For example, in Chicago, in the Humboldt Park that we study, the people actually is the building, is the ventilation, the building material, and the waste of their activities that contribute to the air pollution. And then so the solution can be very different. And then the immobility that contribute, to this. And then in the peak Beijing cases, when people use actually biking, so-called a very active travel mode, then it's actually contribute to, environmental pollution when they don't, when people are driving versus the people who can actually drive. And then so again, in the social context, cultural context, like noise, perception of noise, crowdedness, they express in very special spatial and temporal way. And that's why, I think building the international geospatial health network can be very, important. And I think that I'll just make my last point, since I think that, time is running out. And then the last point is that I think that, so I highlight, of course, only one of the many contributions geography can contribute to human health and the intersection of environmental science and maybe a little bit of human rights. And however, I want to talk about, we need to build more multidisciplinary perspective. For example, personalized medicine fit very well with what I have said about the person-specific geography. And then it tailors to the treatment, to individual characteristics. The challenges is that, obviously we are measuring the external environment in geography very well, the social environment very well. However, there's also chemical, the genetic at work. And then, so this is a complicated, external, general, specific, and the internal metabolism, and all this other, genetic work is going on. So, for example, the environmental factors, like a lot of the things in the literature, like green spaces and how does it affect our mental health, our physical health, can have a very unique impact on each and every individuals. And then, however, it doesn't work just the environment, but also the gene and environment interaction. And then this understanding would need, a further, multidisciplinary perspective. For example, neither genetic differences or the environmental differences can solely be responsible for this. So in conclusion, and I think that identifying the relevant space-time, context is actually what geographers, can contribute greatly. Vulnerable social groups, the effect of environmental influences on their health factors can to operate in a very opposite direction as expected of other social groups. And human health, and in many times that as a human right, then we need, to be taking care of the vulnerable social groups. And then that means that we need to be actually looking into the more complex relationship. And then, for example, some of the temporal dimension can be very complicated, and it doesn't have to be the momentary, but it can be the time lag. and in some other cases can be the different, and the social, cultural, and behavioral contextual framework, and how health and illnesses are perceived can affect health outcomes, and they can be studied through an international perspective. And then this is our theme of our human health theme, is by building an international geospatial health research network. And then the complexity and well-being can be studied internationally and also the multidisciplinary. And then the last two slides is that you may wonder, we're doing sensitive data like drug use, where they deal the drugs, where they take the drugs, and where do they perform sex work, and then what is the process of the sex work, and how do you protect, the privacy and the confidentiality of the spatial data. So I just want to invite you to other sections on workshop in special theme. And then, for example, we are working on a geospatial virtual data enclave perspective, and there's sections and also major workshops in this conference. And of that note, and I want to thank you for listening, and thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mei-Po. Our second speaker is Professor Heather Viles. She's the head of School of Geography and the Environment and professor of biogeomorphology and heritage conservation at the University of Oxford. Professor Viles is a geographer with major interests in geomorphology and heritage science. Much of her research focuses on applying science to heritage conservation. She's co-director of the EPSRC Center for Doctoral Training in Science and Engineering in Art, Heritage, and Archaeology, and history professor at the University of College London. She was chair of the British Society for Geomorphology from 2012 to 2014, and is currently a member of the executive committee of the International Association of Geomorphologists. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Heather Viles, who came to us all the way from the UK to attend this meeting, and she will also be presenting a special lecture in geomorphology tomorrow afternoon. Heather Viles.
Thank you very much, Sheryl. It's a great pleasure to be here, and even more importantly, it's a great pleasure not to be in Great Britain at the moment. And if anybody mentions Brexit to me over the next few days, I might well hit them. As Sheryl explained, I'm a geomorphologist, and my research field is a rather odd one. What links, you might ask, biogeomorphology and heritage conservation? And indeed, you might ask, what are both of those themes? So just to explain, my research follows really three specific areas. I'm interested in how ecology and geomorphology intersect. I'm interested in how rocks break down in rocky environments from the coast to karst through to planetary surfaces such as on Mars. And I'm interested in how natural building materials, especially in heritage sites, deteriorate and how we can help to conserve them. So if you were to give my research field a title, you might call it the Rocky Heritage Biogeomorphology field, which is, I think, a little too niche even for me. So how I've chosen to interpret the brief that we were given is to try and think how the research I do is useful at the intersection of the three broad areas specified: environmental science, human health, and human rights. And I've rather cheekily slightly reinterpreted those to represent three of the grandest challenges facing the globe today: that of environmental change, that of human population and human health, and that of geopolitics and human rights. And I want to investigate this through the rather broad lens of what we might call heritage. Now, heritage can be defined as things that we value for reasons on top of mere economic value, and things that we want to pass on to future generations. And heritage can involve both natural and cultural items, things that are tangible and intangible, and things, as I say, that we value for a range of reasons. So to give you some examples, heritage can include landforms, ecosystems, archaeological sites, historic cities, objects in museums. And the important thing about heritage is it's not simply something of the past or something of nature. It is something that we value, something that is contested perhaps, and something that we want to curate for the future. And I want to use three examples from the world of heritage and geography approaches to heritage to identify some of the challenges that I see in trying to work at this intersection of environmental change, human health, and indeed human rights. So I want to start off by looking at heritage and environmental change under the broad banner of what we might call learning from nature. Now, heritage has a two-way interrelationship with environmental change. Heritage sites are very much affected by environmental changes, which pose risks to them and perhaps increase their vulnerability. And heritage sites also contribute to environmental change through the things that are done on the sites and the processes that operate at those sites. And heritage sites also offer a wonderful opportunity for education about environmental change. Through the lens of heritage can help people to think about how global issues like environmental change are played out at the local level on something that they value. And I just want to give one example of work on heritage and environmental change. And this comes out of my research group, which is the beautifully named OXRUBBLE, the Oxford Rock Breakdown Laboratory. I thought that was hilarious when I came up with that acronym. It's come to haunt me now. But we've been doing some projects over the last 15 years with Historic England and latterly with the Getty Conservation Institute in Los Angeles and with the Dunhuang Academy in northwest China, looking at how we might actually integrate the conservation of nature with the conservation of heritage sites. Rather than cleaning away anything natural from the sites because they pose a threat, maybe we could bring back nature onto sites, and maybe we could increase the resilience of both the cultural and the natural sites as we do so. And this kind of work, I think, exemplifies one of the big challenges that we face, where when we're trying to do this kind of work with nature, throw ourselves into environmental change, we need to deal with complex dynamical systems which we do not fully understand. For my second example, looking at heritage and health, I want to think about what we might call heritage prescriptions. So there's a growing body of evidence that both cultural and natural heritage are good for people's well-being, and that can be for individual well-being and also for what we might define as community well-being. And whilst I say there's growing evidence, there's also some controversy about what that might mean and what indeed a suitable dose of such heritage might be to improve people's well-being. And I want to give you one example of a very recent project that OXRUBBLE are doing as part of a small knowledge exchange grant we have from the university. What we're trying to do is find out for a diverse group of communities what kind of health dose might be associated and valued as part of the historic architectural environment of Oxford, and in particular some of the statuary that surrounds us in the historic centre of Oxford. Could we make a case that people benefit? Is their well-being improved by engaging with the architectural heritage? That's the sort of thing we want to look at. The challenge that faces this type of research is one of how do you quantify this kind of thing? How would you devise a meaningful prescription for this kind of well-being benefit? And in order to do that, we need to develop innovative and interdisciplinary studies which build on the kind of work we've just heard about, using GPS tracking and other innovative ways of understanding how people relate to these heritage sites. My third example then is to look at how heritage and human rights intersect. And I want to do this under the broad banner of learning from the past. So heritage sites are often symbols of power, and as such, they are often subject to destruction, conflict, and can in themselves be very controversial. So we only need to think of sites such as the huge Buddha statues at Bamiyan that were blown up by the Taliban, or the bridge in Mostar that was blown up in the war in the Balkans, to see examples where material heritage is threatened by geopolitical conflicts. And the example I want to give from our work that addresses this theme is part of a collaboration with the World Monuments Fund of Great Britain and also a heritage organisation in Jordan, and is a project that's received funding from the British Council to try and train Syrian refugees in stonemasonry techniques in order to empower them to set up perhaps their own businesses, either to carve beautiful new buildings using the traditional techniques and the traditional art forms, or perhaps to be involved in conservation of these buildings. And I would just like to report that out of the many trainees that have been helped by this scheme, a very large percentage have been female. Now, the challenge that faces this kind of research and action project relates, I think, to issues of ethics. So how do you decide whose heritage you're going to be conserving, or who are you helping with this? How do you deal with the conflicts between local concerns and global prescriptions or global listing of what counts as heritage? So I think this remains, whilst a very challenging and interesting area for geographers, it remains a very difficult area. So to conclude, I think heritage is a very fertile area for geographers to engage with these other areas at the intersection of, as I've interpreted them, these three very grand challenges facing the world today: environmental change, human health, and human rights. But there are many other ways in which geographers can tackle the intersections of these, and I look forward to hearing about more of them as I move through the sessions for the rest of the conference. But I think there are four things which we need to take on board when we're doing research in this area. The first is that we need to be prepared to grapple with complexity and difficulty. These are deliberately challenging areas. The second is that we need to think of innovative methodologies which are both rigorous and also likely to produce new useful data. We need to improve our ability to work in a truly interdisciplinary way, which means that we have to think how we can best communicate what we want to do, not only amongst ourselves as scholars, but between us, the policymakers and the practitioners for whom we want to do the work. And finally, that we need to be endlessly critical of ourselves, critical of our basic conceptions, and critical of how our work may be received. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, it gives me great pleasure to also introduce our next speaker. Professor John McNeill is a faculty member of the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service and the History Department at Georgetown University. From 2003 until 2006, he held the Cinco Hermanos Chair in Environmental and International Affairs until his appointment as university professor, which he now holds. He teaches world history, environmental history, and international history at Georgetown. He's best known for his book, Something New Under the Sun, An Environmental History of the 20th Century World, in addition to his book on the Great Acceleration and Environmental History of Anthropocene since 1945. And his current book project is a global environmental history of the Industrial Revolution. I've had a great pleasure of knowing John for the last 20 plus years from the time Tim Beach and I arrived here in the Washington, D.C. area. He has been an amazing colleague and mentor for both of us, and I think he's the geographer's environmental historian. And I'm very pleased to introduce him as the president of the American Historical Association, and he will join us now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sheryl, for inviting me to speak to the geographers. I'm following two geographers. I am preceding an honorary geographer. I am not a geographer. This would be obvious to you within 15 seconds if I didn't try to conceal it, but I will not try to conceal it. I'll make it obvious in the first 10 seconds. I'm interpreting this prompt very differently, as perhaps befits a historian. I'm going to review my own exposure to geography, how geography has affected work that I've done. I won't say anything about how geography affects work that I'm doing, because as president of the American Historical Association, I'm not doing any work of the sort that geography could help with. I may say a little bit about how geography might affect work that I intend to do, but I'm also acutely conscious that I'm all that stands between you and the grand finale, Dr. Rita Colwell, so I may skip that. First of all, let me review my exposure to formal geography. Okay, that's it. From grade school to grad school, I never studied geography. I never had a chance to study geography. None of the institutions I attended thought geography was worthy of inclusion in the curriculum. You're all probably aware of situations like that, at least in this country. Strangely enough, however, when I was 21, I worked as an instructor of geography at a middle school in the suburbs of Athens, Greece. My idea of geography didn't matter because I was instructed how to instruct. I gave basic geographical data about 75 different countries, one on each day over the course of a semester, probably, I no longer remember, extracted from an encyclopedia. This, I think, confirmed in me a tendency towards what I'm going to call primitive possibilism. And that was reflected in the first scholarly work that I did, a first book which is about islands, Cuba and what's now Cape Breton Island, islands in imperial systems in the 18th century, and how their natural resource-based economies, mainly agriculture and fishing, contributed to the empires of which they were part. And as I reflect upon that work, which I try to do as little as possible, I see in it this primitive possibilism, a sense that geography constrained the opportunities of people and institutions. But that was the maximum level of complexity that I attained. Then I had the good fortune to go back to Greece and to other parts of the Mediterranean, and I wrote a book called The Mountains of the Mediterranean World, which is about peasant and herder life above 1,500 meters in 5 different countries around the Mediterranean. And in the course of that research, I spent some time with my wife's uncle, who told me that geography is half of history, which I responded to flippantly by saying that history is half of geography. And I probably overestimated. I probably should have said 10%. But what I was saying flippantly to my wife's uncle is what I had begun to think, which is that all those things that I consider geography were in the process of evolution. They were all subject to historical change, and many of them, things I was interested in at the time, deforestation, soil erosion, soil nutrient depletion, were subject to anthropogenic influence. So my primitive possibilism was changing into something resembling environmental history, partly under the influence of my wife's uncle, who made his living giving tours of churches in the city of Rome, and partly under the influence of my own tendency towards flippancy. So I started reading palynologists, geomorphologists, plain old geographers, rather more than I was reading historians. And I became conscientious about visiting the places that I was writing about, partly because it was agreeable to visit places around the Mediterranean above 1,500 meters, partly because I was acutely conscious that I had written part of a book about Cuba and had never visited Cuba. I try not to admit that, but since none of you will ever see me again, I think I can own up to it. Yeah, Sheryl, I probably shouldn't have said that in Cheryl's company. So my primitive possibilism was getting a little less primitive as I see it. I was encouraged in these directions by a fact that Sheryl has alluded to, that Tim Beach was my colleague at Georgetown for 20 years, and without intending anything of the sort, he was giving me informal tutorials in various aspects of geography, and in fact, the occasional casual conversation with Sheryl had some of the same, probably better, impact upon me. I never learned to use GIS, no geomatics, no location theory, nothing sophisticated. I am a consumer of what I would call the child's menu from geography's smorgasbord. I remain that. I took 20 years out of doing place-based history because of life circumstances, namely parenthood, and I wrote synthetic global histories, which had much, much less to do with geography, probably because I wasn't thinking in the right terms. But then two things I didn't expect happened. One was the kids grew up and place-based history became feasible for me again. And secondly, some of my work came to the attention of British stratigraphers who were involved in what is called the Anthropocene Working Group. So I'll say a little bit about these two unexpected developments and then cede the floor to Dr. Colwell. So once I was able to do place-based work again, I went back to the Caribbean. In fact, I should say, I went to the Caribbean. Intellectually, I went back to the Caribbean. I had become interested in how landscape change derived from economic opportunities. I'm alluding obliquely here to the plantation economy of the 17th and 18th centuries, how landscape change associated with the installation of a plantation economy led to changes in disease ecology, particularly the arrival and establishment as endemic infections of both yellow fever and malaria, and eventually dengue, mosquito-borne diseases, and how this affected the demography and the politics of the greater Caribbean, by which I meant everything from the Chesapeake to northeastern Brazil. And I convinced myself, at least, that there's a very powerful political consequence of the changes to disease ecology in this part of the world. And that became a book called Mosquito Empires. Now for the stratigraphers. For the last 10 years or so, I've been involved in an intellectual adventure known as the Anthropocene Working Group, rubbing virtual shoulders with geologists, and one or two geographers, but mostly geologists, and within that, the subset known as stratigraphers. For that group, I would say I serve as the informal history fact checker and exterminator of needless passive voice. And in exchange for this, I get a beefed up citation count that impresses my provost, who takes such things seriously. At any rate, working with the Anthropocene Working Group has been an education on the edges of geography for me. I've learned a little bit about how geologists understand space and particularly time. That has not reflected itself to any great degree in my work yet. I hope that it will in the long run, after I become what I aspire most to be, which is ex-president of the American Historical Association. So I would conclude with the following characterization of my intellectual relationship with geography and geographers over the last quarter century. I would say part neophyte and part parasite. Probably I pay more attention to geography than 99% of historians, but it's still not nearly enough. There's far more that I could have extracted, should have extracted, and could theoretically, if I were energetic enough, extract in future from what you all do that is deeply relevant to what I try to do. I wish I had done better. It's probably all Tim Beach's fault. He should have taught me better than he did. But at any rate, I remain just that, neophyte and parasite. I expect to remain approximately that. And I'll take 30 seconds to tell you what I'm going to do with that before I cede the floor. So Sheryl alluded to my next project, a global environmental history of the Industrial Revolution. What I plan to do here is convince anybody who might read my work that the Industrial Revolution should be understood as an ecological transformation and a global transformation from almost the very beginning, rather than, as historians understand it, as primarily an economic and social transformation that was primarily undertaken in the lands of industrialization themselves, most notably the British Isles, and then soon other adjacent lands, and then Eastern North America. I want to portray it in different terms so that Argentina, Australia, Central Africa, and the Canadian West were intimately involved in the process from the very beginning. And I intend to do so by drawing attention to what I will call ingredients of industrialization, what economists would call raw materials, but I want to give it a different name so it's not understood in the same terms that economists understand it. And then chart what I'm likely to call teleconnections, stealing a term from atmospheric science. You're getting a sense of my modus operandi as a historian. Parasite, thief. It works reasonably well. I recommend it to you as an academic career strategy. At any rate, that is where I think I am going after I go to that chair and listen, as all of you will, to Dr. Colwell. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Has it been only a quarter century? I think it has. We'll leave it at that.
As a historian, attentive to time, I should say it's 26 years that you and I have known each other. My career as a parasite and thief is a little bit longer than that.
Okay. Well, it's just a drop in the bucket geologically, so no worries. Well, it gives me great pleasure to turn our program to our finale, which is the presentation of the AAG 2019 Honorary Geographer. This year's Honorary Geographer is Dr. Rita Colwell. The AAG has named Rita Colwell the first woman to be director of the National Science Foundation as its 2019 Honorary Geographer. Rita Colwell currently is a distinguished university professor at the University of Maryland at College Park and at Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. She's a senior advisor and chairman emeritus at Canon U.S. Life Sciences and the president and CEO of Cosmos ID Incorporated. Her internationally recognized research primarily focuses on water and health, with particular focus on cholera and infectious disease. A pioneer for women in science, she has published more than 750 articles and has authored or co-authored 17 books. During her time at the NSF, she not only increased the size of individual grants awarded by expanding the budget of the NSF by 68%, but also advocated for greater support for women scientists and science and technology education. Dr. Colwell has taken on many significant advisory positions in the U.S. government, nonprofit science policy organizations, and private foundations throughout her career, including her role as former president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. It gives me great honor to present the 2019 American Association of Geographers Honorary Geographer Award to Professor Rita Colwell.
Thank you very much indeed, Sheryl, for the kind introduction, and to all of you for this honor. I suspect that I have been practicing or attempting to practice geography without a license. Now I can do it honorably, so I thank you all very much. I would like to discuss with you today, very briefly, some of the work that we've been doing. How do I get you to move this? Good. I'm going to talk about cholera, not a great subject just before dinner, but nevertheless, it's an organism that continues to be a major threat to humankind. In fact, there are epidemics going on in Yemen at the time, and I'll discuss that in a minute, and also Mozambique, it has occurred. It's a watery diarrhea that can be fatal, if not fluid replaced. Do I aim at you or aim at the, very good. Discovery made very early on, a number of years ago, was that we found that the bacterium has a host. It's a plankton, it's a copepod in the oceans. Physicians didn't really like this discovery because they just assumed that it was person-to-person transmission, but it is an organism in the environment. The early work allowed us to relate the fact that in the spring months, when the sun rises and the temperature increases, phytoplankton blooms occur, and then the zooplankton blooms follow. We were able to correlate these reactions, and subsequently we determined that we could measure the changes in the cholera, that is, to map the cholera epidemics by using satellite sensors. The theory is that first, phytoplankton bloom, chlorophyll can be measured. You can calculate 4 weeks or so when the zooplankton will feed on the phytoplankton and become dominant. Then that bloom will crash, and then the vibrios will be released, the bacteria that actually cause the disease. And then those who drink water without filtration, without any treatment, would then come down with cholera. Now, we were able to put this together in a way that was really quite surprising. This was done in year 2000, that's almost 20 years ago. We simply measured by satellite sensors, Landsat, the chlorophyll, and then counted the number of patients in the Bangladesh hospital, and this was correlated then with occurrence in the Bay of Bengal, and we're able to determine quite accurately the relationship between these environmental parameters and the outbreak of cholera. Now, we were able to show further, again, I'm not quite sure how this works, good. We were able to show further that with much more sophisticated models that we had developed, that we could actually predict when cholera would occur. And so the slides that I show is the predicted risk of cholera in Haiti in 2016, that is a couple of years ago. And then the right-hand side, or I guess the green with the red center, that shows the actual cases. So this was a study in Haiti, and then subsequently we carried out studies in Yemen in 2017. Now, what was very interesting was that the fact that we were able to retrospectively predict and show the relationship of these environmental parameters with cholera was picked up. We published some papers. It was picked up by Scientific American. And then the British Agency for International Development, or I guess the equivalent, DFID, the equivalent to the USAID, the senior administrator called in January of 2018 and asked if we could collaborate. So in fact, in 2018, we worked on predicting with our model cholera outbreak in Yemen, which was really seriously underway. In fact, in Yemen in 2017, millions of cases of cholera and thousands of deaths. So by mapping and providing our predictive model maps to DFID, they were able to locate physicians and supplies in Yemen. And so in 2018, our predictions were so successful that cholera was very significantly reduced. And today, actually, literally this morning, I was on the phone with the folks in London as we now will take our model and move it to Mozambique and Senegal in Africa. So what we've been able to do is take the geographical findings for Bangladesh, extrapolate to Haiti, to be able to determine this successful model now that we can use for predicting cholera in Africa. The prediction is 4 weeks ahead of time, and we're working on making this 8 weeks earlier. So if we can predict 8 weeks ahead of time, then the supplies, the physicians, the safe water approaches can be brought in and lives can be saved. Now, I would like to close this very brief discussion of our work on cholera by pointing out that safe water is really the most important, I think, contribution we can make to public health. Now here you see in the slide women collecting water in Bangladesh, and in the pond you can see that simultaneously hygiene is practiced, or lack of hygiene, however you want to put it, and that contamination is a serious problem. So what we had determined was that from the very early work, that cholera host is a plankton, which in microscopic terms, that is, as a microbiologist, a copepod is sort of an elephant compared to the bacteria. It's about 200 micrometers, and a bacterium is about 1 or 2 micrometers. And so we hypothesized that having done all this elegant work with satellites, and more recently we do a lot of work in the genomics of the bacteria as well, which I don't have time to discuss, but the point is that how could we as scientists put the knowledge that we have gained and provide a simple solution for those in Bangladesh in the remote villages? So we proposed that the plankton could be filtered out with a very simple filter. And we tested a variety of materials, men's t-shirt material, women's sari cloth, and we found that in fact, sari cloth folded about 4 times provided a very nice 20 micrometer mesh filter. And so we were able to persuade the NIH, actually it was really the Nursing Institute, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, decided this wasn't sophisticated enough, so they lateraled it over to the Nursing Institute, thank you Nursing Institute, which funded a 3-year study in Bangladesh. And what we did was in fact train women to act as extension agents and then to teach the women in the villages how to filter the water. And then the success was that we were able to reduce cholera by 50%, taking scientific knowledge and principles, applying it in a very simple way, and actually saving human lives. So I still would like to emphasize that we do have a challenge with a population that is careening toward 10 billion, and with the limitation of water supplies that we have to consider safe water to remain as a really serious global challenge. And so I like the words of John Muir, the founder of the Sierra Club, when he said, when one tugs at a single thing in nature, he, and then I inserted and she, finds it hitched to the rest of the universe. So that's essentially my message, and again, my thanks to all of you for providing me with a title of Honorary Geographer so I can continue to practice my amateur geography, at least with a license. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Colwell. Well, please join me in thanking our panelists with another round of applause for a terrific job. We have certainly demonstrated the breadth and width and depth of connections that geography can make in a variety of areas, from science to technology, to engineering, to arts, to mathematics. You're all a very talented group of people, and I wish you well to go out there and do some more geography. Have a wonderful conference. Thank you. Tomorrow's main event is we have Eric Holder delivering a keynote address at noon in the ballroom. So we look forward to welcoming Eric Holder as one of our other major events. Thanks again. Have a great night.